Have you ever stopped and noticed how certain people seem completely unshakable? You know the type. Traffic is backed up for miles and they're still breathing easy. Their boss just unloaded on them and somehow they're still measured, still composed. The world around them is spinning and yet they're steady, grounded, and present, and especially calm. How would you like to be one of those people? Welcome to Mystical Journeys with Jase. It almost seems unfair, doesn't it? Like these people have some secret you haven't been lit in on. Here's the truth. They do have a secret, but it's not a secret you have to be born with. It's not something reserved for monks in mountain monasteries or people who've never experienced real hardship. In fact, many of these grounded individuals have been through the most difficult seasons imaginable. Their difference is that their lives are not necessarily easier. The difference is they're grounded. Today, we're going to go deep on what it really means, not in the vague spiritual fluff way that things get tossed around on social media, but a practical, actionable, real life way. We're going to talk about what grounded actually is, how you know when you lose it, how you know when it's going to be lost by you, why losing it costs you more than you realize, and most importantly, how to come back to center when life just inevitably does and tries to knock you off center, especially if it's life's trying to talk you out of things and knock you off course. Anyhow, being grounded is not just a spiritual idea, it's a skill. And like any skill, it can be learned, practiced, and strengthened. Before we can talk about how to get grounded, we have to understand what grounding actually is because there's a lot of confusion around this word. First of all, we are not discussing being grounded in the sense of being trapped in your room all day because you forgot to take out the garbage. All right. Anyhow, being grounded does not mean you're emotionless. It doesn't mean nothing bothers you. It doesn't mean you float through life in a state of blissful detachment, those caricatures. Being grounded means you're present, emotionally stable, and connected to reality rather than being swept away by reaction. It seems that when life pushes you, and it will push you, you don't lose yourself in the push. You feel it, you acknowledge it, and you come back to the center. Think about the roots of a tree in the storm that doesn't stand there rigidly, completely unmoved. The branches whip around, the leaves scatter, the whole thing bends and sways, but the roots hold. And because the roots hold, the tree doesn't fall. This is what grounding is. The branches of your life, your emotions, your circumstances, your relationships, your daily chaos, those will always move. Grounding isn't about stopping that movement, it's about having deep enough roots that the movement doesn't uproot you. This concept isn't new. Ancient Stoic philosophy explored it in tremendous depth. Marcus Aurelius, who is arguably the most powerful man in the known world in his lifetime, and chose to write daily reflections on inner stillness. He believed that everything valuable lives in the interior. He wrote about the things outside of us, the weather of life, are largely outside of our control. What we can control is the weather that's on the inside. The Stoics called this the inner citadel, the part of you that no external force can truly conquer unless you surrender it. Grounding is what keeps that citadel intact. In modern psychological terms, we might call this emotional regulation or the ability to maintain a stable sense of self, even under deep pressure. It shows up in therapy frameworks like dialectic behavior therapy, like mindful based stress reduction. It also shows up in trauma recovery work. The language differs, but the core idea is still the same. There is a steady place inside you, and learning to access it changes everything. Okay, let's discuss what it looks like when somebody's grounded. Let's make this concrete. Grounding isn't abstract, it shows up in ordinary moments, sometimes the quiet ones that you might not even notice if you weren't paying attention. Here's a few examples of what it sounds like in daily life. All right, let's go with the first example. Your boss pulls you aside and criticizes your project. Maybe the feedback is fair, maybe it isn't. Either way, it stings. For most people, the automatic reaction is to get defensive, to feel personally attacked, and you want to explain yourselves or deflect the attack. A grounded person doesn't operate from that place. They feel the discomfort. They're not numb to it, but they pause. They breathe. Internally, they shift from reaction to response. They might say something like, I hear you. Let me think about this and let's come back with a revised approach. Or they might ask questions like, what specifically would you like to see done differently? They treat the feedback as information rather than an attack. And from that shift, from that threat to information, that's the hallmark of a grounded mind. Example two: someone in your life says something disrespectful. Maybe it's a partner or a coworker or maybe even a family member. The words land and they sting. Every ungrounded instinct in you wants to fire back, to match their energy, to defend yourself, to make sure that you know that you're not going to take it lying down. A grounded person feels that impulse. They don't deny it, but they also don't obey it either. They take a breath. They create a tiny gap between the stimulus and the response. And in that gap, they choose. Maybe they address it calmly. Maybe they decide it's not worth engaging at that moment. Maybe they ask a clarifying question. But the key is they choose. The words do not control them. Example number three: in uncertainty. Plans fall apart. A job opportunity disappears. A relationship ends. A health scare arrives. Life is full of moments where the rug gets pulled out from under you, where you suddenly find yourself in a situation you didn't choose it and really didn't want it to happen. Ungrounded people spiral here. The mind races to the worst case scenarios. The body tightens with fear. The sense of self just feels destabilized. Who am I if I fall apart in this way? A grounded person doesn't skip the grief or the fear, but they anchor in the present moment and they say, okay, what do I actually know right now? What is the very next step I can take? They narrow their focus to what is actionable and real rather than expanding it towards everything that might go wrong. These are not superhuman behaviors, these are practiced ones, and they're available to every single one of us. What it looks like when you're not grounded. Let's look at the flip side. And I'd like to spend some time here because most of us spend more time ungrounded than we'd like to admit. And we often don't even recognize when it's happening. All right, first sign: emotional reactivity. Someone disagrees with you, and before you've even consciously registered what they've said, you're in a defensive mood. Your rate spikes. You feel a surge of energy in your chest. You want to push back. Maybe you do. This is not necessarily a moral failing, it's a nervous system response. When we're ungrounded, our regulatory capacity is reduced. We're operating closer to the edge. So small triggers produce large reactions. You know, you're emotionally reactive when you regularly regret things you said in the heart of the moment. When you snap and then you have to apologize. When you feel like you lose yourself in arguments and don't come back till hours later. Here's the next sign: chronic overthinking. Your mind is always somewhere other than where your body is. You're physically in the room, but mentally rehearsing a conversation from 3 days ago, or you're projecting forward into a future scenario that may never happen. This is the mind in an ungrounded state. It cannot rest in what's actually happening because it's too busy trying to control everything that might happen. Seneca, one of the great Stoic philosophers, captured this perfectly when he described how we suffer far more in imagination than in reality. The suffering of the ungrounded mind is largely self generated, not because of anything terrible is actually happening in the present moment, but because the mind keeps insisting on living somewhere else. Sign number three, absorbing the room's energy. You walk into a space where somebody's stressed and anxious, and within minutes of you walking in, you're also stressed and anxious. You weren't before you walked in, nothing in your life has changed, but you absorbed the energy of the environment and now you're carrying it. This is sometimes called emotional contagion. Well, I don't know if I got that word right, but that's the correct word. And it's a natural human capacity. We are wired to resonate with the emotional states of the people around us. That's actually part of what makes us empathetic and connected. But because we're ungrounded, this natural attunement becomes a liability. We don't just notice the energy around us, we become it. We lose our own emotional center and replace it with whatever the room is feeling. If the room is panicked, we panic. If the room is negative, we spiral downward. The fourth example, physical tension. Grounding isn't just a mental state, it's a physical one. And the body tells the truth about whether we're grounded, even if the mind tries to insist that everything is fine. Tight shoulders, a clenched jaw you didn't realize you were holding, shallow breathing, a general sense of bracing for impact that never goes away. These are the body's signals that the nervous system is in a state of low grade alarm, not relaxed, not present, and definitely not grounded. If you live in your head a lot, you probably spend very little time actually inhabiting your body. And that disconnection from the physical place is also a symptom of being ungrounded and definitely a cause of it. All right, let's get into the next part. Why grounding matters more than you think. You might be thinking, okay, grounding sounds nice, but is it really that important? Can't I just be a little reactive sometimes? Can't I just overthink a little? Here's what I want you to understand: the cost of being chronically ungrounded is enormous. It touches every single area of your life. When you're ungrounded, your decision making suffers. You make choices from fear rather than clarity. You say yes to things you should say no to. You avoid conversations that need to happen. You react to problems instead of solving them thoughtfully. Your relationships suffer when you're ungrounded. You're harder to be around, not because you're a bad person, but because your emotional volatility becomes a burden that others have to navigate. Conflicts escalate a lot faster. Misunderstandings compound. Trust erodes slowly. Your health suffers. The chronic activation of the stress response that comes with living ungrounded, it takes a real psychological toll. Elevated cortisol, disrupted sleep, weakened immunity, higher risk of anxiety and depression. These are not metaphors. They are documented and very measurable consequences of an unregulated nervous system. On the flip side, when you develop the capacity to stay grounded, everything changes. You think more clearly. You respond instead of reacting. Your energy becomes more focused and more calm. Your relationships deepen because you show up with consistency. You begin to feel like the author of your life rather than a character written by circumstances. That's the real promise of grounding. Not an escape from difficulty, but the ability to meet difficulty without losing yourself. All right, let's go over some techniques to become grounded. Let's get into some of the practical tools. These are not complex. In fact, their simplicity is part of the power. The challenge isn't to understand them, it's remembering to use them when you actually need them. So I encourage you not just to listen, but to actually try each of these this week. These are a few of the ones that I use. Technique one, the breath reset. This is the fastest grounding tool available to you, and it costs absolutely nothing. Your breath, when you slow your breathing deliberately, you send a signal to your body that it's safe. The stress response begins to quiet. Your heart rate drops. Your mind clears. Here's the pattern I recommend. You can try it if you want. You can do it right now if you wish, but let me give it to you first, and you can give it a little bit better try a little bit later. Okay? Here we go. Inhale slowly for 4 seconds. Hold it for 4 seconds, and then exhale fully for 6 seconds. The extended exhale is crucial because it activates the parasympathetic nervous system, which is your body's natural rest and recover mode. Do this for 1 minute, about maybe 4 complete cycles, and notice what shifts, not just in your mind, but in your body. Your shoulders may drop, your jaw may soften, the tightness in your chest might ease. This technique works in any situation. You can do it before a difficult conversation, in a traffic jam, right when you feel a surge of reactivity, in the 30 seconds before you say something you're going to regret. It works because it's not a mental trick, it's a physiological intervention. All right, technique number two, physical grounding. There's an increasing urgent need for the world to connect with the physical reality. And I mean that literally. We are a species that evolved to have regular physical contact with the natural world. We are now spending the vast majority of our lives living in artificial environments, staring at computer screens, rarely touching anything that isn't man made. Physical grounding brings you back into contact with the real, tangible world. Here's some ways to do this: walk barefoot in the grass, on the dirt, the sand, the earth. Feel the texture beneath your feet. Hold something with real weight and some texture: a stone, a piece of wood, a feather, a smooth crystal. Some people like to use a stone called hematite. Try placing your back against a tree trunk. Feel its stability behind you. Sit on the ground. Press your palms flat against the earth. These practices work because they direct your attention out of the abstract of thought and back into the sensory physical experience. You can also train with the life force of the object you're near. The nervous system responds to physical reality. It calms down when given something to really engage with. Here's another technique: the intention anchor. Here's a simple morning practice that, if you do it consistently, it will change the architecture of your days. Every morning, before you check your phone, before you scroll through the news, before the world starts making demands of you, ask yourself one question: how do I want to show up today? Maybe the answer is calm. Maybe it's focused. Maybe it's compassionate. Maybe it's patient with yourself and others. Whatever it is, speak it aloud. Name it. Claim it. This does something remarkable. It sets an intention that your mind then orients towards the rest of the day. When something challenging happens, and it will, you'll have a reference point. You can ask, is this how I wanted to show up? Is this the version of me I chose this morning? That question in the right moment can redirect you right back to the center much more quickly than anything else. Okay, let's get on to the next part, the deeper truth about grounding. I want to close today with something that I think often gets missed in conversations about grounding and inner work. It's not a permanent state you arrive at and never have to think about again. Even the most seasoned practitioners, the people who have been meditating for decades, people who teach these practices, still get pulled off center sometimes. They still have moments of reactivity and they still lose the thread. That's not failure, that's just being human. There's a beautiful image from the contemplative traditions. The mind is like a river. Emotions and thoughts are like the weather on the surface, sometimes calm, sometimes stormy, sometimes dramatic and choppy, but beneath the surface, there's always a current, steady and continuous, undisturbed by what happens above. Grounding is to learn to touch that current, to know it's there, to trust it, and to return to it as an anchor when the surface gets wowed. When you're grounded, you're not harder or more defended. You're actually softer and in some ways more present, more capable of genuine connection because you're no longer bracing for impact. You're no longer fighting the current. You found the place inside that can hold steady while being fully alive. That's real power, not the power of control or domination, but the power of presence, the power of a human being who has learned to live from within their center. And that changes everything. All right, here's what I want you to do this week. Just this one thing. Every morning when you wake up, before the day takes hold of you, take 60 seconds. Take a slow, full breath and then say out loud, not in your head, but out loud, today, I choose to stay grounded. That's it. Say it like you mean it. Say it like you're making a decision. Then, as you move through your day, notice when you start drifting. Notice when your shoulders creep up. Notice when your mind starts spinning ahead into worry and run on. Notice when you're about to react and you've had a chance to respond. And when you notice, don't judge yourself. Just come back, breathe, say internally, I choose to stay grounded and return. Grounding isn't something you master once, it's a daily practice, a daily return, and a daily choice. And the more you make that choice, the more natural it becomes, the more available that the deeper steadiness feels inside you. The more you clearly begin to see that that peace you've been looking for was never somewhere out there. It was always in here. Try some of the other techniques I mentioned earlier. See which one calms you the best. Share one of these with your friends. Okay. If this episode spoke to you, I would love it if you would share it to somebody in your life who could just use a little more calm right now. You never know what someone's carrying. Sometimes the right words at the right moment make all the difference. And if you're finding some value in mystical journeys with Jase, please make sure you hit that follow button or subscribe so you never miss an episode. Every week, we go deeper on the things that actually matter, the inner work, the awareness, the practices that will help you live from your best, truest, and most authentic self. Until next time, stay centered, stay present, be grounded, and keep exploring that deeper journey within. I'll see you next time.